A very good evening to one and all. Welcome to the next talk in the Sitara seminar series. Today with us we have Sumna Skolagi, who has recently finished his PhD in International Development at the University of Sussex. He is intrigued by the concept of development, an indispensable dynamic of present-day existence. He is involved both in theory and practice of Swaraj development, paradigm proposed by M.K. Gandhi and C Kumarappa. Currently, he is associated with the Janapada Khadi initiative of Janapada Seva Trust in Karnataka. Today, he'll be talking on the topic Development as Swaraj, Opportunities for Social, Economic, and Ecological Equity. On behalf of the Sitara family, we welcome you, sir. Now we can proceed towards the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Kiran, for the introduction. And first of all, I would like to thank Sitara for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas and my work. And so now directly I would like to just dive into the topic. And what I'm speaking today is actually based on my PhD work that I recently finished. And also what I'm doing now in Melkote, which is a small town. It's in between Bangalore and Mysore in southern Karnataka. So so my topic is that I've selected today is development as Swaraj, and so this was a part of my PhD work. And to start, I think one of the very important question that I would like to deal with is what is development, because development has become very central today. If you go to any rural part of India, everybody wants development and everybody wants to get developed. In a way, the whole idea of development is worshipped by the modern world. And recently, 2021 of February, so Sri Narendra Modi made a very clear statement, saying that development is our aim and development is our religion. So this is something a huge thing, because in a way, development has become a global faith and also a central organizing principle that defines global social order. Okay, so here, then what is this development means? So a lot of times, development has a lot of meanings. People use it in different ways. But if you really go through it, you realize that there is essentially there is a one single meaning that is embedded in a lot of other ways that how we use. So that is essentially an intentional act originating from enduring human tendency to transform existing living condition closer to the perceived notion of prosperity or the idea of good life, right? So this is something you could, if you just trace back the whole debate of around the idea of development, you can just see this. And today, all states and everybody are looking for, this idea of sustainable development. So which has become very central today for a lot of policy and how a nation functions. And if you see this idea of sustainable development, so there is an embedded idea of prosperity. So that is in terms of possessing more and more material wealth while achieving distributional equity and environmental sustainability. So, for example, so this is our idea to anybody in urban centers or in rural spaces. So this is the idea of life that people have. This is what people are aspiring for. One should have a big car and this kind of an urban setup. It's basically kind of a material accumulation is very central for the idea of life today. And so the biggest problem, what is this, having this kind of an idea of development. So one is the biggest problem is, as you all know, the environmental crisis, we're reaching a tipping point where, by a lot of studies are showing by 2050, so we would be having probably we will reach a stage where we no more, can survive on this planet. Right. So because we are losing out very essentials of life, for example, air, water, and soil, which is very fundamental for life. So this is one big challenge. And the other one is inequality. If you just see, if you just compare, what's been happening from last over the couple of decades, you could see, rich is getting richer and poor is getting poorer. So, for example, according to the latest Oxfam report, 10% of the population in India, top rich 10% actually holds 77% of the national wealth. This is something a very, very bothering thing that we all have to think about. And very interestingly, in 2017, so almost just top 1% of the people have actually got 73% of the wealth. 73% of the national wealth got accumulated in the hands of just 1% of the people. So these are something two important problems as a humanity that we are facing today, and here the development has something very central role to play. And apart from this environmental crisis and social inequality that we are facing, the another important aspect that I just wanted to cover is of happiness. Today, because the idea of development, in a way, whether a nation has progressed or not, is in a way decided based on the idea of still largely based on the idea of GDP. It's basically how much economic transactions that we have done. So that becomes a deciding factor. So, but interestingly, a lot of people are, thinking around the world, we should come up with something very different criteria to assess, whether we have progressed or not. So one of the thing is the happiness. So interestingly, if you see, every year this Happy Planet Index has actually been put up. And if you see that, very interestingly, very small countries like Costa Rica, Mexico, and Bhutan, these are the very small countries. They are actually are on the top of the list. And if you see for example, USA, it's somewhere in around 100 and 120, and India is around 50. This is something a very important question. It raises very important questions, because today for all of us, in a way, America is a role model. We really want our country to become another USA. But interestingly, if you see the happiness in those countries, so-called the developed countries, like America and Western European nations, so the people are not very happy. And why is it so? If you see that, very interestingly, a lot of research is actually going around the idea of happiness. So here the pie chart that I'm showing here on the bottom of the left bottom. So that actually from a very interesting book called Prosperity Without Growth by Tim Jackson. So if you see that, it's from a very recent data, from research on happiness. So according to those research, so almost 47% of happiness for an individual actually comes from having a good family relationships, right? And the second biggest, portion actually comes from health, having a good health. And like that, having a nice place to live, 8%, and money and financial situation is 7%. So this is something very important to understand, because today, because just to get this 7% of happiness, we are losing of so many other things, like today we are living so away from the family, and we're really losing out our family relationships, and also we are losing out our health. We are working more hours, right? So this is something we have reached a point where we have to decide whether we are going in the right direction or not. So one of the reasons, why America and so many other countries, the so-called developed countries, have lost happiness, it's because they have ended up in this vicious circle of consumerism. It's like, they have to work and they have to earn money and they have to, spend on it and to purchase something, right? So it's a never-ending process. So this is one of the important aspect I just wanted to cover. It's in a way really connected to the idea of development. And so then what is this problem? Why the sustainable development has failed in all these three important aspects. So one of the important, that I could think of is actually, this objective of accumulating material wealth on the other hand, on one hand, and achieving this equity and sustainability on the other hand, is actually there is a tension, between these two goals. So if you try to achieve the first one, you lose out in the second. And if you try to achieve equity and sustainability, you lose out. You can't really, keep up with the idea of accumulating more and more material wealth. So this tension, if you see, is the very central reason. And if you see, why we have ended up having this kind of an idea of prosperity or the idea of development. So it's very important to trace it out. It's all started in 17th century, particularly in the Enlightenment period in the Western European nations, right? So what happened during that period is that the cosmology, the people that hold, how they are related to the larger cosmos, that actually got changed. Till the 17th century in Europe, people were actually thinking that everything was actually driven by divine providence in a way, right? So everybody is interconnected through this divine providence. So that was very central. God was something very central figure in that cosmology. But after, a lot of scientific inventions, particularly after Newton, when he proposed Newtonian cosmology, saying that, see, there is no God. It's basically everything is driven by material, right? So this understanding really changed a lot of things. So one of the very important implication of that is actually, considering human beings as completely, independent, completely autonomous. We really don't have any connections with larger cosmos or any other beings in the world. So this becomes very central, and this conception of individuals become very, very central. So this is, in a way, if you still holds in our idea of sustainable development. So this is where I would like to come into the idea of Swaraj, proposed by Gandhi and C Kumarappa. And I'm sure everybody knows Gandhi, but I don't know how much people know about C Kumarappa. So I would like to just say a few words about him. So he was actually from Tamil Nadu, and he goes to America to study public finance at Columbia. And very interestingly, he works on he actually, his master's dissertation was actually on the British policies, how these public policies of the British, in a way, very exploitative, how it is in a way trying to snatch all the wealth from India and transferring that back to UK. So this was his dissertation. And interestingly, if you see, E.A. Seligman, who was a supervisor for Dr. Ambedkar, was also a supervisor for C Kumarappa during his master's dissertation program, right? So that is something very interesting. I just thought of saying it here. And through this dissertation, actually, he comes close to Gandhi, because when Gandhi reads this dissertation, he thought that Kumarappa has something to contribute in the freedom struggle, and he really. So from that point, their journey starts together. And since from 1930s onwards, Kumarappa becomes one of the very close associates, and he was the one who gave a lot of economic dimensions for Gandhi's idea of Swaraj. So that's why, if you really want to understand this idea of Swaraj as a development paradigm, it's just so important to consider Gandhi as well as C Kumarappa. And so now I would like to just talk about the Swaraj development approach or Swaraj development model. So if you see this, basically Gandhi and Kumarappa, how they try to understand, the transformation in the social order or transformation in the society is basically through three lenses. These three lenses are in a way connected like a fold that you can see on the slide here. So where the first one is called the normative fold or normative lens. So it's basically deals with, what should be, what kind of society we need. And the second one is called interpretive fold. So that basically deals with the existing living conditions in a way that actually uses this normative fold as a lens to understand, what's happening around us. And the third one is the pragmatic fold. It deals with what can be done. How can we transform the existing living condition more towards this idea of or towards this normative idea or normative goal. So this is something very important to understand before getting into the idea of Swaraj development. And here, if you just think about this normative idea, so normative idea is in a way it acts as a direction for a society to move forward. It's not something like utopia. It's not something like we can achieve it completely overnight. So it's rather than we really need to understand the idea of Swaraj as something, as a direction for a society, as a civilization to move forward. Okay, so this normative vision of Swaraj, or the idea, because Swaraj was very central for Gandhi's work and all of his journey. So here, if you see, the idea of Swaraj in a way is built on this framework of moral political economy. So basically, Gandhi and Kumarappa had understood or tried to understand what's happening or the transformation of the social order through these three lenses. One is this moral, and the other one is political, and the other one is economic. And these three things are interconnected. You really cannot separate these three things. So this was very central. So whenever I'm saying about moral, it's about the sense of right and wrong, and politics is about power relations in the society and the power structure, and the economy is about material relations. And these three things are interconnected. This was something very important to understand. So if you come to the sphere of morality, so Gandhi was very clear on the morality should be based on non-violence, truth and non-violence. And here it's just so important to understand what he meant when he was using truth, because for myself it took a lot of time to just understand what he meant by truth, because he says he talks about in the world we have like two kinds of truth. One is a relative, which actually where people hold that and it actually changes over time, but there is another something which is absolute. So he says that the absolute truth, in a way we cannot understand it completely, but the important thing, he says that we can just sense it, what it is. So that is through analyzing our everyday life. So he says that if you just analyze our everyday life, so for example, the food on our plate, if you just trace back, how a food on our plate is possible. So there are so many people from across different caste, religion, and gender, and also non-human beings have contributed in this whole production of the food, right? Which is something very essential for our survival. So if you trace back this material relations, you realize that individual existence is dependent on so many other people, and individual existence in a way is a result of contributions made by so many other people, and humans and non-human beings. So that's why Gandhi says that it's very important as a truth to hold on to this idea of individual good is embedded in the good of all. So this is something very central, right? So here first it becomes the others becomes very important, and through that you really experience the goodness. So this is something very important when he was the moral dimension. The other one is a political dimension, because he says that the power relations is something very important, and he was emphasizing on decentralization of power. It should not be centralized, right? So today, if you just see, for example, the whole panchayat system, for example, in a way, even though it seems like fairly decentralized, but it's still highly centralized, right? If you, for example, if you just see in Melkote, for example, we have a Gram Panchayat. If you see here, a lot of things are actually decided in Bangalore and Delhi, So it's basically these panchayat people just have to follow that. Really, they really don't have that kind of a Swaraj or self-rule. They really don't have that autonomy to decide, what they want, and they really don't have that independence. So this is something very important, because any centralized system inimical to self-rule, or it really destroys the individual freedom. So that's why decentralization of power is something very, very important. And also in this whole process of decentralization, this idea of satyagraha, non-violent resistance, becomes very important, because Gandhi clearly understood, and Kumarappa clearly understood, that as human beings we really have, as human nature, we have two sides. So one is the self-interest, the other one is altruism or selflessness. And as long as we have the self-interest, we always have this possibility of having exploitative relationships, right? So that's why they were saying it's very important to have this kind of a non-violent resistance as a part of decentralization process, because they clearly understood, if to have any kind of an exploitative relationship, there is an equal contribution from the oppressed too. It's not just only oppressor, but also the oppressed. So this understanding is something very important. So basically, I don't like to get deep into the idea of satyagraha, but it's basically through love, through appealing to the moral self of the oppressor. You always have to try to change the equation and to reach an agreement, so to have an harmonious relationship. So this is something becomes very important. And here, in terms of economics, this is where Kumarappa becomes very relevant. So they really understood there is a very clear connection between politics and economics and morality, and you really cannot separate politics and economics, right? So for Kumarappa and Gandhi to have a political democratic setup, or to have a non-violent democracy based on consensus, sorry, I forgot to mention this consensus, because they were very keen on consensus rather than having this majoritarian decision-making process. Because today, if you see today in the parliament, for example, a lot of issues, very important issues like environment, is always a losing battle, because a lot of people in the parliament, they really don't take environment as a serious issue, right? So that's why Gandhi and Kumarappa was more and more emphasizing on consensus. So that is a very important way to kind of provide control for people over their life, right? So this is something very important. And in terms of economics, so here the focus is actually on reducing the distance between production and consumption. This was something very important for Gandhi and Kumarappa. So they were talking about economics in terms of self-sufficiency, because the whole modern economics today is actually built on the notion of efficiency, right? We have to produce more things in a set time. So that becomes very essential. But here it's more about self-sufficiency. So self-sufficiency here, it's not means you have to produce everything for yourself. So rather than, it's more about, in relative terms, it's more about reducing the distance between production and consumption. So why is it important? Because Gandhi and Kumarappa clearly understood, there is every material transaction has a material every material transaction has a moral dimension to it. This is something today we have forgotten, because as consumers today, in the market, we just purchase something if it looks nice or if it's cheaper, right? So a lot of times we don't consider how these things are being produced. So when Gandhi Kumarappa says, as the distance increases, as consumers really cannot trace out how things are being produced. So for example, if you just take the example of garments, for example, right? For all these huge brands from Zara to so many other brands that we have, all these things, the branded materials are being produced in a very exploitative conditions in places like Dhaka and other places, where women are not even people who work in these garment factories. They work in very harsh conditions. They don't get living wages, and even a lot of times the rape happens in those kind of an working units, right? In between these kind of a social condition, this branded fabrics are being produced, and as consumers sitting in Mumbai or in Delhi or in Bangalore, purchasing that, in a way making us a part in that exploitation that's happening in somewhere else. So that's why for Gandhi and Kumarappa, it was just so important. If you really want to create a exploitation free society, that was very central for Swaraj. So you really need to reduce the distance between production and consumption, and that is the only way how a person can lead an ethical life, right? So this was something very important to for all of us to keep in mind. And the other important aspect is this human energy, because Gandhi and Kumarappa was emphasizing on this. When I'm talking about human energy, it's about as individuals, as human beings, we have some energy in our body that we can use it to do a manual work, right? So this is for Gandhi and Kumarappa in economics was very central, because they realized that because a lot of times the energy decides the larger political economy, and it's very important to come up with an energy source that can be accessed by everyone, right? So through that, we really can create a more self-sufficient society. And for them, human energy, then at that context, human energy becomes very important, because that's the only energy source that everyone have access to, right? So this is something, three dimensions on which the idea of Swaraj development is built upon. And here, what is this idea of development in the development paradigm? So here, the idea of development shifts from material to spiritual or moral. So once the basic material needs are fulfilled, okay. So here, achieving a state of unalienated life or living one with the cosmos is considered as a goal, as an objective. Or if you try to understand in terms of prosperity, so it's about peace, having an internal mind of tranquility and external harmonious relationship with others. So this is something very important. This is what Gandhi was talking about when he was talking about this idea of moksha, right? So it's about having this state of life. So achieving this is something very central in this whole idea of development. So this is broadly, I just wanted to cover the outline of what this development paradigm entails. And now I would like to just move into the practice side of it, what extent we can just practice this kind of a development paradigm. So here I would like to share the initiative that I'm involved with in Melkote. As I told you, here we have a small organization called Janapada Khadi. So it's a voluntary organization started in 1960s by my grandparents. And one of the activities that we have is Khadi activity. As you all know, Khadi is a hand spun and hand woven. And here in Janapada Khadi, we produce it using natural dyes. Okay. So here I would like to take up this initiative and just talk about how we have tried to translate this theoretical ideas into practice. So here in Janapada Khadi, what we have done is we have tried to keep Swaraj as a central for this enterprise, and try to build a small non-violent community based on the idea of Swaraj. And here one of the important feature is that focus is actually on the people and not on the material that are being produced. Here for us the importance is creating an atmosphere where people have complete control over their life, and freedom of workers becomes very important, and their happiness becomes priority. So rather than the material that we produce. So if you see, contrary to if you see the modern production systems, the focus is actually on the material, how much we produce, what we produce, and people who produce becomes a secondary. Here we have tried to bring back that focus back to the people. So there is something one important thing that we have done. And the other thing is that we have evolved a three stakeholder model, where 1/3 of the investment is actually made by themselves, and another 1/3 by the coordinator, who are the person who can lead the whole activity. I myself have taken that responsibility and earning my livelihood through that, and the another 1/3 by the Seva Trust. So the idea is that people who are working with us are not just wage laborers. Here the idea is to break this relationship of worker and owner. This is something very important, and we have tried to break that through this three stakeholder model. And here another important aspect is all the decisions related to the enterprise is actually taken based on consensus rather than majoritarian decision making. So this is something another very important aspect. And the third one is, we have set a limit on the scale, because as a part of my PhD during my field work, I realized that there is a very important connection between the scale and the democratic atmosphere, right? So there is a very interesting book called Human Scale by Kirkpatrick Sale. So he talks about the scale. Basically, he says that how scale is important. A lot of times we don't consider it, and so he pulls in a lot of evidences across the world, and he says that if you really want to have a democratic atmosphere in an enterprise, so that limit is around 30 to 50 people, and if you cross that, it becomes it becomes impossible, more and more difficult to reach consensus, right? So that's why we have consciously set a self limit on the scale itself. This is something stands completely contrary to the modern idea of expansion, right? And here the idea of growth is more kind of a horizontal, not like a vertical. Today we have, it's not like today we have working like 20 people, tomorrow we should take it up to like 100 or 1000 or 2000, right? So here more of an horizontal idea. So this is something very important. And in a similar way, we also set the limit on production itself, because we realize that it's a vicious circle, and unless we put a self limit, so so as I told you before, producing more and earning more, it's a never ending process. So that's why what we have done is that instead of fixing the minimum, which you see, if you go and see any other production systems, a lot of times there will be targets for people, they have to produce this much in a day. But here we have fixed the maximum. So saying that people should not be working more than certain amount, right? For example, our weavers are not allowed to work more than 150 meters per month. So the idea is that, if you want more money, you should be able to bring more money for the same volume, but not to increase the volume. You should not be like working more than 15 hours, 20 hours like that, right? So this is something, another important aspect. And since we have fixed the self limit, so people are, involved in so many other activities. So for example, what, in rest of the time, once they finish this 150 meters, they involve in other activities. For example, they have regular, theater activities, and once in a year they perform a play, and we do they go for exposure trips, and we do potlucks, we do readings. These are all something in a way trying to bring change in the moral dimension, in the moral sphere of the enterprise, right? It's not just only about the material thing, but it's equally, it's a moral and material project. So all these community development activities that we are doing is in a way trying to bring that change, trying to make people understand, how individual good is embedded in the good of all is becomes very central. And that's what we are trying to do with all this. And lastly, we have also we have make sure that everybody earns living wage in Karnataka. In my place, we have decided that at least a person should earn 300 rupees a day, so that 9 to 10,000 is per month. So whoever working for 6 hours should get that, and we have assured that for all the workers who are part of this. So it's a very small collective of 10 people, and everybody earns that living wage. And also we have fixed the cap on the income share, because it's like 1:3. So if somebody is earning 1 rupees, 3 rupees, the highest earner, and the lowest would be 1 rupee. And if the highest person, the highest earner wants 6 rupees, then he has to make sure that the lowest would get 2 rupees, right? So this is something to reduce the inequality within the enterprise. So we have done that. And also we have created a lot of social security funds. For example, 10% of the profit goes for this community development fund. And so we use it for all these activities, like as I told you before, theater activities, reading, potluck, exposure trips, prayer meets, and all these things. And apart from that, we have we have set aside about 5% as a health fund. If there are any health emergencies, people can use this. And also we have created, interestingly, we have come up with another fund called God's Aid. So it's basically 1% of the profit goes for that, because we realize that it's very important because the trust is something very important if you really have to work as a collective, and it should be reflected in the monetary terms too. So because a lot of people who work, most of them who work with us are actually women, and they require small amounts, like for their chappals or for their petrol, like this. And what we decided was we set aside 1% of the profit for that, and we keep it in a box, and everybody can will have access to it, and nobody will be sitting there and monitoring it, right? So it's actually monitored by the God himself. So this is how we created a narrative. And so when we started off this 2 years back, we started off with 1,000 rupees. And so at that time, a lot of people were not sure whether it works or not, because everybody was thinking somebody else will take it away. But interestingly, after 1 year, 1,000 rupees had gone up to like 1,300 rupees, and now we have kept like 10,000 rupees like that, and nobody will be monitoring it, and everybody is using it and returning it in a month's time if possible with some little interest, right? This is working beautifully. So this is how we are trying to create a system where everyone has a control over their life. That's what Swaraj means. And also setting the idea of development here, it shifts from once you fulfill your material needs, it shifts to more into moral. So that's where this whole community development activities comes in. So this is what, in a way, I just broadly wanted to share the theoretical ideas and its practice. And yeah, so this is what I just wanted to share. And so lastly, I have this is just a picture that I just wanted to share. This is the 2 years back, the first top left corner image. So that was of a play they performed 2 years back. And so here on the right side, top right corner, so that is a picture of our weavers wearing the khadi materials they had produced by themselves, instead of for our e-commerce website. So we wanted some pictures. So instead of asking somebody to come from urban centers as a model, so what we did was we really encouraged the people themselves to wear it, and we use that pictures on our websites. And so that really had a very positive impact on the weavers themselves, because till then they were thinking that the khadi is only for the elite urban class. But they realized that once they wore it, they realized that how beautiful it is, and they voluntarily actually bought a couple of fabrics and saris after we did that photo shoot exercise. And here on the bottom left, so that is of all our viewers had 2 years back, we had gone to North Karnataka to see and interact with traditional weavers, because all our weavers are not actually from a traditional weaver community. They're all from different caste, and come learned and they're doing the work. And we had gone there. When they interacted with those traditional weavers, they realized that how horrible their conditions are, because North Karnataka or in traditional weavers communities, two people working together, and hardly they would be earning like hardly 5,000 rupees something. So here, at least in our case, at least one person is earning about 8 to 10,000 rupees. So they realize how better their conditions are. These exposure trips really helps people to expand their worldview. And here bottom right side picture is of having this exercise. It's about design exercise, because a lot of times what happens is that design is given by designers, but in our case what we have done is that we really wanted to give space for people to exercise their creativity. And so we came up with this idea of teaching them the design itself, how they can come up with their own designs. So now whatever we produce is actually, in a way, is actually design of the producers themselves. So these are some of the things I just wanted to share. And since this whole khadi activity involves a lot of human energy, at least a dozen people are involved in the whole supply chain. So every time as a consumers we purchase something, we will be supporting at least a dozen livelihoods. So if you just compare that with power looms, for example, so hardly it supports 2 or 3, because a lot of things are actually done by the machines themselves. And at the same time, so it has become a solution for environmental issues, because it is based on human energy. It's the environmental impact is so less that it really, I see it as a future, aspirational, futuristic occupations, particularly in the context of environmental crisis that we're facing today. So this is what broadly I just wanted to share. And if you people have any questions, I'm just happy to answer. Thank you.
So there is one question in the chat by Akanksha. If you can read. Or...
Yeah. Who needs to keep a check on this? Who needs to keep a check on this? Oh, yeah, it's a very important, very interesting question. So I think definitely there is a huge role of the state, but at the same time, it's also there is equal responsibility from the consumer side, because we are the demand creators, right? And that so over the years, we have built a system where the whole intention of the system is to not people understand this larger moral connections, right? So we have created such a system. So that is the big problem. And Gandhi and Kumarappa was against this, right? So if you see after independence, a lot of Gandhi and Kumarappa's ideas got sidelined. And now again, a lot of people are coming back to Kumarappa and basically his, I just would like to mention his work, Economy of Permanence. I don't know how many of you know it. It's very important book. You can just, you can get it on, on Google. So if you see that, now people are, because of this whole environmental issues and other things that we're facing today, a lot of people are now showing interest to, go back to Kumarappa's ideas. And so that's why, for your questions, I think definitely government has a role to play, and at the same time consumers too. And this consumer awareness is something very important. Thank you.
Students can raise their hands if they have any question. Yes, Shashank.
Thanks, Kiran. Hi, Sumanas. I am Shashank, PhD student at Sitara. So I want to ask a rather provocative question. So, so building on the experience of your organization, and when I'm trying to relate it with the larger political economy, and I'm wondering that if the large capitalistic accumulation based economic system is working and there are organizations and individuals who would like to earn more and more and accumulate more, why should I or the women with whom you are working, why should they stay behind? I mean, why should not they have that kind of aspirations?
Right. So it's a very interesting question. So one of the thing, here, as I told you before, whatever the decisions that we have taken is actually based on consensus. So that is something very important to understand. It's not something like I am imposing my ideas on them, right? It's basically, we have, over the years, we have managed them to, expose to these larger things that's happening around the world, and why it's just important to have a self limit. And they have voluntarily, have accepted that idea. So that's how it's working on. And so yeah, so this would be my answer for that. And then definitely, I'm not saying they really don't have any aspirations for more, but definitely they have. But at the same time, there is inherently they have reached a point where they can understand this larger issue. So that is something very important. And definitely, we really want to bring more money for them. It's not like a person should earn just only 10,000 rupees. So that is not the case here. We're really trying to get more and more money to their hands, but at the same time the whole process should be more eco-friendly and socially just. That's what we are trying to do. Thank you.
Yeah, since nobody's asking, this is Pankaj here again, Sumanas.
Yeah.
Kiran. So I'll just, the question, Shashank's question, if I just push it further and continue to be a little more provocative, Sumanas. Okay, in your case, you're saying that this is, how it is, and there is consensus, and but this probably is one of the biggest questions that will come up, and you must have had this question a number of times. How does so one possibility that I'm seeing is that the idea of this self-limit is also a realization and an acceptance within individuals that everybody's common good lies in some kind of self-restriction, because otherwise, it's a situation where eventually nobody wins, and that's the environmental crisis, for example, that we are facing. Everybody trying to accumulate, and at the end of the day, if the climate system collapses, everybody suffers, whether you have or not. Maybe there are differences of how you suffer, but we all suffer. So That perhaps is the inherent, the morality that you are speaking about, Gandhi's and Kumarappa's ideas. But what is the, and it's not just a mechanism question. In the, for example, in the tragedy of the commons kind of discussion, which itself has now been challenged to say that actually there's no tragedy of the commons and communities can manage. It is that if I don't take, somebody else will take away. This is an example that you gave of your God's aid. How does one, what might be the mechanisms or the experiences where some of these things don't happen, or does this just remain a wishful idea? We might all want it, but great idea, it can never be done. So you've just given us a little example of what's happening in Janapada, and you say, okay, that's it. But what is the use of it if it cannot be, upscaled, so to say? So I mean, that's where I want to push you to think of what might be a larger possibility.
Sumanas, just a minute. Right. I'll just add a question to what Pankaj. This is Subodh Wagle. I'll just add a question.
Yes, sir.
To what Pankaj asked. If I remember correctly, I may be wrong, but Tolstoy Forum was started by Gandhiji in 1910. There were about 70 people in that forum. Your experiment has 10 people. Okay. So we have about 110 years between these two experiments. And in the meanwhile, there have been many such experiments across at least our country. Why it has not picked up? In fact, it is on the wane. What I call as a third generation of Gandhian or second generation of Gandhian, Prem Bhai, then Devan Bhai, all these people. After that, all what they did, their ashrams have become either family fiefdoms or enclaves, which are supported often even by foreign funding through FCRA. This is a parody of what Gandhi tried to do, and this is not just one or two. I would say there are very few like what you are participating in, which are out of these two categories, either family fiefdoms or the enclave supported by foreign funding through FCRA. Why this tragedy, and what gives you sort of strength to say that this model is still viable?
Right. So I think it's a very important question, and definitely, if you go and see any Gandhian institutions, they are about to defunct. And as you rightly pointed out, it's if you go see, there is no spirit in it. A lot of Gandhian institutions. So I could just answer it in 2-3 ways. So one is that I think after independence, so when Vinoba Bhave took over the Gandhian movement, I think that's where we slightly lost the track, because Vinoba, I personally feel that took it to because for Gandhi and Kumarappa, it was something they realized that this moral and material both are something very important, and even if you want to have a morality of non-violence, so it's actually needs to have some kind of a material basis to it. And if a person is hungry, that person really can't think about others, right? In a lot of times. So that's why this balancing this material and moral was something very important. And I think when Vinoba took over, I think to some extent he really failed to have this balance. So that is the one thing. And the second one is, I feel that a lot of Gandhians, after a lot of Gandhian followers themselves couldn't understand what the vision of Swaraj that Gandhi had, right? So even for a lot of Gandhians, so the Swaraj was just getting freedom from the British, but that was not it. And I think this ideological, having not a very clear ideological clarity was, I think, one of the important factors, I would say. And at the same time, the second one is this, this experimentation is something very important, and that was very central for Gandhi and Kumarappa. That's how they were really making all their initiatives very relevant. This experimentation, you really have to experiment with the changing circumstances with your ideas, and that has not happened. If you see, because as part of my PhD program, I actually looked at a lot of Khadi institutions across Karnataka. So they're all about to defunct, because one of the reasons is that there is no this experimentation happening. That is another very important aspect. And the third one is this institutional innovation is something very important. We here, as I was talking about, I was talking before, here we have tried to change this institution, institutional modeling, right? So here we are trying to give more and more stake for workers, and they're really giving up the ownership. So this is something very important. In a lot of Gandhian institutions that has not happened, right? So this institutional innovation is something very important, and that's missing in a lot of Gandhian institutions. So these are the very, I can just think of 3-4 reasons why a lot of Gandhian institutions have failed. And what gives us strength to continue this activity? Because I feel that, if you really want to see it in a Gandhian approach, it's just so important to understand this connection between means and ends, right? So because Gandhi was very clear that as human beings, we really don't have any control over the ends. It's only about the means, or even very limited control over the means, right? So this understanding is something very, very important. So that really, the whole point is, as individuals, we really need to enjoy that whole process of doing it rather than expecting something out of that action. So this is something forms a very basis for Gandhian approach, and that is something very important. I think we have taken it very seriously, and that forms the basis for our strength, I would say. And and then the third one is, for a lot of the question of Pankaj about the scaling it up. I think I really don't have a direct answer to it, but rather I think we should see it as I was telling you before, because Gandhi and Kumarappa in Gandhian approach, they really understood, world works in relative terms. It's not about absolute, right? So it's the whole point is of our life is to work as much as possible towards our vision, our normative vision of Swaraj. So this was something very important. So that's why, as a direction, if we see if we accept Swaraj as a direction for us to move forward, then it's up to all of us to think creatively how we can, change our situations more towards that idea. So yeah, so this is how I just can respond to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sumanas. I mean, also, I'm not actually saying whether you can answer for somebody else. So it's finally each one of us also has to decide. But yeah, thank you. I mean, I think at least I really like some of very interesting responses. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sumanas.
Thank you, sir.
Kiran, there is a hand up. Charu?
Yes, sir. Charu, so you can ask a question.
Yeah, maybe the students let them complete first, and later on I will ask.
No, there are no students asking. That's the point. So maybe you can go ahead, Charu.
So there is one question in the chat from Harshit. How would you suggest to reduce consumption behavior?
I think again, it's a two broad questions, and I really I think it's up to all of us to decide, how we can deal with this. And one thing would be definitely, to make more and more people aware of this, moral dimension of this material transactions that we're doing. So that is something very important. And also as a state, it's very important to think about more and more about the idea of self-sufficiency. That is also equally important. And I really don't have it's a two general questions. I really don't have an answer, how we can just reduce the consumption. We really can't do it. I think it's up to us in our own ways to creatively engage with this question and come up with answers. Yeah, that would be my question, Harshit. Thank you.
Yes, sir, Charu, so you can ask your question.
So Sumanas, how many people are working in your organization right now?
So our organization is a very small organization. So we have about 30 people, and about 10 people are as part of our Khadi activity. And so this organization was started by my grandparents, and my grandfather Surendra Kavligi was a secretary for Jayaprakash Narayan for quite some time. And we have several activities, and the Khadi is one of the activities. And apart from that, we have organic farming, and also we run an adoption center. So where we get 1 day to 5 years old abandoned babies from Mandya and Mysore districts, and we give legal adoption for parents who need children. And apart from that, we have a center called Hosajeevana Dari. It means Way to New Life. That is about 20 acres campus. So out of 20 acres, 10 acres we have set aside for an afforestation program. So keeping biodiversity in mind. So we are trying to grow wild native trees. And apart from that, we also hold a lot of short-term education programs, largely focused on environment, development, and lifestyle. So these are the activities. And we have the team is about 30 people.
Okay. And when it was started, how many people were there?
So it's actually started in the 1960s. So they actually started off with working with physically challenged children. So they worked actually for almost 3 decades. And because of the polio eradication, so we started the adoption center in the same place. And I would just suggest to look at our website. It's called janapada.org, janapada.org. So where we also have a very small video of 20 minutes. So that talks about the history of last 60 years of our journey. And yeah, so I really, because I really don't know when they started in 1960s, how many people were part of this. I really don't have an idea.
Okay. So, like, what I want to check with you is that what will happen when your organization will have more than, say, double the number of employees that you have right now. Okay, that is question number one. And I mean, I personally, please don't take it otherwise, but it seems like more of a hobby or a kind of an interest related work. What are your serious targets towards production?
Right. So yeah, the first question is,
I mean, for scaling up the production. It's quite similar to what I think Pankaj asked, but yeah, in that sense, because
so the idea is that
if I just consider say 10 people working on Khadi, each person earning 10,000 per month, and with your ratio of 3:1, 3:1 something ratio you talked before. So if at all everybody is earning 10,000, 10 people means only 1 lakh per month is the output. Okay, so it's a very low capital business. I would say, because because you will at the end have to reach out to the market to sell things. So don't you think that you are talking two big things on a very small aspect? And if not, how would you want to multiply it further? Or say, if at all at your organization, if your manpower becomes, say, threefold or fivefold, then how would you think, what kind of management principles on the basis or themes of Gandhi and Kumarappa would like to bring in?
Right. So for your first question, so in reality, if you see, in rural India, so today, there is a lot of urban migration, and basically youngsters are not willing to stay back in villages. So that's happening especially in Melkote and around places, because it's very close to Mysore and Bangalore, the big cities. And I really don't see, a lot of people are coming in, as you're saying, like 100 people or 200 people. I don't think so. That is a very realistic. So that is the one thing. And even if people are come in that number, the idea would be to encourage them to set up a similar kind of models in their own places, in their own villages. It should not be like under the Janapada Khadi, but definitely they will be, we will be sharing our knowledge, and we will be sharing our learnings with them, and encouraging them to have their own model, right, or have their similar kind of a setup in their own places. So that's how we want to deal with that, if the numbers actually becomes more. So, and for your second question, I think I'm really sorry to say, I think this is something, a serious stuff that you're doing. It's not at all hobby. And I honestly like to disagree with that, because here, we're really trying to working on some certain ideas like Swaraj. And to do this, you really have to be, it's just a full-time work. It's not something like I'm just doing it as a hobby. For example, I myself, after finishing my PhD, I've come back to Melkote and trying to translate these ideas into practice, right? And also, I'm earning my livelihood from this. For example, anywhere I'm just earning about 10 to 15,000 rupees per month. I'm trying to live with that money, right? It's not something like I'm just doing it as a hobby. It's through these activities, I'm just trying to survive myself and set an example, saying that, here, look at, we can actually do this, because I myself am doing this. So I just like to slightly disagree with you, because it's a very serious stuff that we are doing here. And The other thing is, as you're talking about, with the capital and the expansion idea. So this is where we are drifting away from the Gandhi's idea of Swaraj, right? Because here the focus is actually on people, having a space where everybody can have complete control over their life and lead a happy life. So that is something very important. It's not about about capital. It's not about earning 1 lakh rupees or 2 lakh rupees. So that is not the whole intention behind it. And it's not even about the production, right? So if we are earning enough for our basic, to fulfill basic material needs, that is enough. So that's exactly what we have to understand, I think. And so that's what we are trying to do. So this is what I just wanted to respond. I'm sorry, I'm not very harsh on this, but I just wanted to say this is what I just wanted to respond.
Yeah, so I'll just want to put one more counter to that.
Yes.
So if that is what you can say summarize on Swaraj with respect to Gandhi, then would it mean that whatever kind of scale of production that would require for addressing the requirement of the people of India, would Gandhi would have gone against the big capitalist industrialist in the country after independence?
Right. So I think to answer this question, I think I would like to just go back to the normative idea of Swaraj. And here, definitely Gandhi and Kumarappa say there is a need for this huge industries, and particularly in public utility sector, right? And energy sector. So definitely those are all required. We are not denying it. And the second thing is, it's more about, it's not like Janapada Khadi in next 10 years would be producing all the fabrics for the whole country. So that is not the whole idea here, right? So it's more about having these kind of models at different places, and that's how we can try to meet more and more demand. So this is another very important way to understand. And the third one I just wanted to share was actually if you the whole idea of meeting the demand, for example. So if you see from handloom today, as you know, traditionally India was a textile in it was a textile was very very central for Indian economy, and largely it was dependent on human energy based textile production like khadi, it's like handloom. So now we have shifted all that to machine based like powerloom sector. It has become a huge thing now. So if you just see how long it has taken to shift from this kind of human energy based production system to machine based production system, it has almost taken 200 years, right? From industrial revolution time. So what I'm trying to say is that we really should not think about changing this overnight. We can't just think of we can do it in 10 years or 15 years. So that is not the case here. It's a more about how we can shift and more towards this idea of a normative idea of Swaraj. And it may take several years, who knows. And also it's not a very Gandhian way to think about whether we can actually produce more fabrics. So that is more about emphasis actually given on the outcome. So here the focus is actually on the means. So we really have to think about how we can, if there is so much demand, we really have to think about how we can try to produce it as much as possible, and should give priority to the handloom sector and khadi sector. So that should happen. And yeah, so this is how this is what I just want to respond to your question.
Okay, so Sumanas, my only submission to you is that please rethink on the terms of ideology and reality.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So there is one question in the chat by Shashwat.
Yes, if you see Khadi Village Industries Commission, so for example, there is a silk khadi is there out there, but in our case, we are just only working with cotton, so not with the silk. But definitely, there are ahimsa silk is there in Northeast. So basically, they don't really kill the that moth, and they actually produce yarn out of that silk yarn, and they make beautiful materials. And yeah, definitely, of course. But originally, I would say khadi was actually meant for cotton, but now it's widely silk is also comes under that.
maybe if there are no more questions, we can wrap up. Anybody else? Kiran, maybe you can. Would you like to say anything else, Sumanas, to wrap up, and then we can formally close?
Yeah. I think I had a great time. I think it was very interesting questions were asked, and I'm just so happy to, because these kind of very critical questions really helps me to expand my ideas and become more and more, ideas can become more and more relevant. And thank you very much for this opportunity again.
And maybe Kiran, just before, if Anand, our head, would like to say anything. Anand, would you want to?
No, thanks, Sumanas, for the very thoughtful talk and handling all the questions. I really appreciate you spending time. I have a couple of questions, but maybe we'll continue the interaction session with faculty, I guess.